started. So, welcome everyone to our webinar on responsible adoption of artificial intelligence, how to seize the opportunities and do so both legally and ethically, which will, as we'll discuss in a moment, aren't necessarily the same thing. so, how about if we each introduce ourselves and then we'll just launch into this conversation. So, Michele, go ahead and start.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Michele Berdinis. I'm the founder and president of Beeline Legal. I have been practicing trademark and copyright law. I thought about it yesterday. It's 29 years, so not quite 30, but getting there.
You can claim it. Round up.
Just round up. Okay.
Round up. All right. Hi, and I'm Andrea Hill. I own Hill Management Group. We have 4 brands that serve businesses, all focused on helping businesses grow. And we have a very strong technology practice here and a deep experience with and interest in AI. And we're fielding a lot of questions about how to implement AI in businesses. So Michele and I were talking, and we thought this would be a really good time to share with people, some of the things you need to know and think about to do this well. So I thought we'd start by just saying, there's a lot of different types of AI.
Yes.
And we're not talking about all of them today. I mean, right. We can throw your questions out here. We'll answer what we can. We'll say we don't know to what we don't know. But so there are reactive machines, that type of AI. We see a lot of that in, it's the chess playing machine is a reactive AI. Spam filters are reactive AI. They're all over the place.
Yep.
AI has been around for a long time. It's not new since ChatGPT.
Yep.
So there's that type. There's limited memory AI. Those are the kinds of things that we see running machines in manufacturing plants. Self-driving cars are limited memory AI. What else? Speech recognition systems. So that would be examples. There's reinforcement learning AI, which is, I don't know. What are good examples of that? Game playing stuff would be reinforcement learning, right? You cause and effect type stuff. There's a goal. The AI, plays around in the parameters of the goal or the rules. Then there's theory of mind and fully autonomous AI. So that's the end of the world Terminator stuff. Largely theoretical, really fun to talk about, but not what we're talking about today. And then there's generative AI. And that's what's got everybody talking right now.
Right.
And so while we're happy to touch on a lot of these things today, really the focus of our conversation today is generative AI.
Right. And it's, so what's the difference between one and the other? So there's already been some legal stuff that's come down that says, okay, this is what this is, and this is what this is, and this is the thing that's the problem, and this isn't the thing that's the problem. But it's important for people to know like where that line is being drawn legally as well as technically.
Yep. And it's not easy to wrap your head around. I mean, I've been working in, AI software and technology implementations for as long as the AI has been available. We've been working in it. And then I've been running businesses for 30 plus years. I'm going to round down. And still, I mean, God knows how many contracts I've, been responsible for signing in my career. And still, as Michele and I went back and forth about this, she was still saying, no, not quite. No, that's not quite how to look at it.
Yep.
But Michele, how much would you say, let's say, the average business person that can run a department or run a business on a scale of 1 to 10, they're not a lawyer.
Okay.
How well do you think most people understand IP?
Even if you include lawyers in that, there aren't that many. The practice of law has become highly specialized. And I regularly, for example, have lawyers calling me and saying, I have a client and they have a copyright issue. And then they start describing the issue. And that's actually a trademark issue. Right. So it's not really that complicated to know the difference. But if you don't have to know it, why in the world would you know it? So I'd say a lot of technical people know one aspect of AI. They might know a lot about patents because they've applied for one or gotten one. But knowing the distinctions and what we're going to be talking about today really dives down into really specific stuff that, until I started really reading up on it, I wasn't aware of a lot of the stuff that I've discovered either. So yeah,
But even before AI, IP is just like
no, it's
everybody has
complicated.
a ton of misconceptions around copyright.
Yes,
Like
tons of like that thing about like where you put it in an envelope and mail it to yourself. Yeah, there's all, yeah,
lots of myths, lots
lots
of
of myths. Yeah,
misunderstandings,
yeah,
both overreactions and underreactions.
yep,
So we're going to be talking about some really specific things related to IP, related primarily to generative AI today, because that's where you have to really think about it in your business.
yep,
We're also going to be talking about some of the legal and the ethical stuff. So, yeah, I often say that the part of me that is concerned about social well-being and equity and fairness, this part of me really worries about AI. The part of me that is a programmer and runs technology-based businesses, like, this is really exciting, right?
right,
And they are in conflict with each other a lot. So, and so we have to worry about ethical things and legal things.
right.
And why aren't they the same, Michelle?
Well, they aren't the same because having laws is attempting to accomplish a different thing than having ethics, right? There's
What does
certain,
that mean?
well, the law is trying to protect the law. There's for example, why in the world do we even have something called copyright, right? I mean, ethically, there's not necessarily a need to have something like that. There's lots of things that people create where there is no protection for it, right? If you're a dress designer and you design a dress, you have no way to protect that. It's not your property, right? So why did we decide in the Constitution that we're going to protect certain types of intellectual property? It's because we're public policy wise, we want to encourage people to create those types of things. And the way to encourage people to do that is to give them property rights and protection. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily an ethical decision. And there's lots of unethical things. Being mean to somebody is unethical, but
It's not illegal.
governance not really in the job of stealing somebody's parking space at the grocery store. That's not nice, that's not ethical, but are we really as a society going to get involved in that? No, like, let it go.
So, and there's a whole raft of ethical issues around AI, and we will touch on those
Yeah.
today. And then there's a whole raft of questions around the legal side and very little actual legal stuff.
Well, we're going to be talking about two different branches here today, right? There's two main legal issues that we're going to be talking about. The first one is if you use the type of AI we're talking about now, the generative AI, and it, for example, creates an image, like I want to, create an image in the style of pick an artist, right? That is what we don't know. Like we don't really know legally about really what's going on there. So that hasn't really been decided yet. There's cases out there now, pending lawsuits, where we'll start to know some more. The other branch of that is who owns things created by generative IP. And we know the answer to that question. I mean, the answer might change at some point in the future, but as of today, we know the answer to that question very clearly.
All right. So I want to go back to something you just said. And
Yep.
so I've been involved in some type of IP in business for decades now. And you said something when we were chatting last night, and you just said it now, but I want to go back because I think it's profoundly informative. The purpose of copyright, the
Right.
purpose of trademark is to encourage a society that creates things.
Right. Right. Yeah. The
I never
purpose of
thought
actually,
about it that way.
yeah, the purpose of trademark is even more interesting. The purpose of trademark is not to protect businesses. The purpose of trademark is to protect and help consumers. Right. So it's like if you buy a can of soup and then you go to the grocery store next week because you want that same can of soup, and we don't prevent people from creating, using the same trademark when they're not that source, then the consumer loses out because they don't know, they have no way of identifying the soup that they wanted to buy. So, and when you read trademark cases, for example, they're framed that way, right? It's not like it's nice that the business owns that property, but the reason we give them that ownership is to protect consumers. So, and you're right, but copyright is to encourage people to create things, paintings and buildings and books and things like that. And the purpose of patent is to have people invent novel and non-obvious inventions.
All right. Understanding the purpose of that kind of legal framework, I think, helps us all
It does.
imagine smarter ways to interact with it.
Mm-hmm. And it also will help in understanding why some of the legal decisions that we're going to talk about today have happened the way, why they have decided the way they have.
Yep. All right, cool. So before we dive into the legal part, I actually kind of want to touch on the ethical part because there are a lot of ethical debates. And I was looking through the list of people who were subscribing to this particular broadcast. And we've got a lot of artists that are joining this broadcast. We have a lot of writers joining this broadcast. There are a lot of senior executives of companies primarily involved in marketing and sales joining this podcast. But then we also had people in the product development areas of companies joining this podcast. So it's like we got a pretty broad scope of people, and and we're all interested in how to do things right in our business. And I think the ethical questions around AI are a good place to start. And then let's dig into the legal fine points.
Okay.
And by the way, we did produce an ebook for everyone who is signed up for this broadcast. And if you're watching us on a live stream, you can go sign up for it just so we've got your email address and we will send it to everyone. Probably tomorrow afternoon, it will be going out and we'll get that link in the for you guys. So if you want the ebook, and it will go through all of this in more detail, including a framework for considering how to implement software that includes AI, or that is primarily AI, both in your business in all the different departmental areas. Okay, so first ethical issue around AI: bias and discrimination.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is that a discussion?
It's huge. It's gigantic. Yeah. You're right. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? Bias in, bias out.
For it.
Yeah, it's exactly that same thing, right? And so if the data set that the AI is looking at starts off biased, if the programmers who decide what should go into that data set are biased, and we're all biased.
We're all biased.
We're all biased, right?
It.
And they don't account for that. If they're not aware of the biases that they're creating and then find some way to account for that, then yeah, we're just creating racist AI.
Exactly. And we have racist AI.
We already have racist AI.
Recognition software that does not recognize faces of people of color because it was almost entirely trained on white faces.
Yep.
So it misidentifies people of color. So this is the core example of why AI is worrisome from an ethical standpoint. And to fix AI that has bias and discrimination in the training data sets or in the algorithms that were used to program the training data sets, or in the learning mechanisms that were used after the, as the software develops, we either have to eradicate the biased data or correct for it. And these are big projects in these massive AI databases. Yeah. So, and it affects everything from human resources decisions.
Right. Because it's AI actually looking at all the resumes that come in. Right. So if you have trained your data set to accept what are commonly thought of as names of people who are white, and who were the good hires, and those all turn out to be white people, and who were the people that you chose not to hire in the past, and those were all names that are more traditionally associated with Black and brown people, then that's exactly what the AI is going to give you.
That's the worry. Now, it has been proven that when you take out the biased data and you actually let AI look at credentials, not just in terms of what people have done, not just where they went to school.
Right, yeah.
The AI is actually much better at identifying the people who are most likely to be successful in the job, because the people who are interviewing and reviewing resumes also have bias, because we all come to work with bias or come to life with bias. So, so AI can be very beneficial here, but if you don't understand the issue, you don't look for it.
Right. Because if the way that you trained your AI is you said, here's all the resumes that we've reviewed ourselves, and here are the people we hired, and here are the people who were successful, right? The AI doesn't know whether they should be looking at that, the credentials and where they've
Right.
worked, or if they should be looking at the person's name, or if they should be looking at what city they were from. I mean, it's astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah. So bias and discrimination, huge issue. We do dig into it much deeper in the book, give some good examples, and talk about it in each functional area of business so that you can consider how that might be affecting your own business's performance. Second area, and honestly, this is going to start looking more, it's, right now I'm treating it as an ethical issue, privacy, but there's a legislative and legal piece that's trying to emerge or figure itself out. I mean, the truth is, in the US at least, we don't have a
Yeah.
uniform privacy policy.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. But
It
okay, so
is.
let's talk about why AI is an issue for privacy for a moment.
Right. So when we supply data online, there's always an agreement that says, this is what we're going to use your data for, and this is what we're not going to use it for. I have personal experience of having medical information being shared that was not supposed to have been
Oh,
shared. But
yay.
yeah, so it's exactly the same thing. We provide our data with an understanding, in many cases, a written understanding of how it's going to be used, and a lot of stuff that we don't have the expectation that it's going to happen that way.
Well, and that's the problem with these massive training data sets that
Right.
AI is using is it's scooping up huge volumes of public data, of which our private data could be part. And without being able to tell us how that data is going to be used, there's no opportunity for us to give informed consent. And
Yes.
businesses do have privacy responsibilities. So it's an ethical issue, but it's also a messy because it's still emerging legal issue.
Yep.
So that's another concern. We want you to be more familiar with the privacy issues related to AI in your business and as it relates to your business data. Then there's accountability and transparency. You know,
Right. And nobody wants to be transparent because that's their trade secret. That's the secret sauce. They don't want to share how they're training it and what they're doing.
right.
Um,
Though
yeah.
there are databases that were so there's a concept in AI development called explainability, and it's the
Mhm.
ability of a system to explain what it used, what it was trained on, and how it was trained, and what it used to make the decisions or recommendations it makes. And there are AI databases that were designed for explainability. But just go to Chat GPT and ask it, are you explainable? And it will explain to you all the reasons why it's not. so it's so it can't tell you where its data is coming from and how it's being used and therefore how it generates its decisions, which becomes very important when we start talking about the legal issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Job displacement is one of the ethical issues that we're facing with AI. So the Goldman Sachs report that just came out predicts that 66% of all jobs will be at least partially impacted by using AI more extensively, and that it's going to increase GDP by 7%, but widening the income gap rather than closing it. Now, Paul Krugman wrote in the New York Times just yesterday, yeah, but everybody said that about the internet too. And when in fact you look at the overall productivity impact of the internet, when you measure it in economic terms, maybe not. So, I mean, it's not like Goldman Sachs's prediction is going to become completely true, but also Krugman's really cranky. So, um, but people's jobs are going to be affected by this.
Yeah. And I I don't know what to say about that. You can't put the genie in the bottle, and it's exactly the people who don't have the resources to get further training and to uh, find another position and learn a new skill. It's exactly those people who are going to be most impacted.
Yep. Well, and we're going to see a lot of tech workers impacted, and then we're going to see a lot of people whose jobs become less fulfilling, more
Mm.
boring as they serve the AI, but don't necessarily get to do some of the fun things
Create.
they create.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a concern. And we want businesses thinking about that because if it's affecting your business, you don't want to be the company that outsourced everything in the 1990s to manufacturing and then suddenly couldn't figure out how to make anything anymore. We have to think about this for our businesses and how it affects our human resource
Yeah.
development. Um, then there's this issue of data ownership and control. And we're going to hit that last because that's where we're going to segue into our legal discussion.
Okay.
So I don't know if you watch, there's another ethical concept, which is called dependence on technology. So, Michelle, do you watch Chicago Med at all? Okay, well, there's a sexy surgeon on there. His name's Crockett something. I just remember his first name. And he's been using this AI machine to do all his surgeries. And in the middle of a surgery, the AI hits the limit of its ability to make recommendations. And he's stopped. So this person's bleeding out on the table, and he can't decide what to do next because he's been so dependent on the technology. And yes, it's a TV show. And yes, it's mostly made up. But dependence on technology has hit our hospitals in recent years. When all the power goes out, people find they can't do procedures manually. They don't know where
Yeah.
the records are. So the ethical issue around dependence on technology is a real one. If
Yeah.
AI is doing more and more and more of what we do, what are we not remembering, retaining, or learning or advancing in our own brains?
Yeah. There was a couple of weeks ago, the a certain part of the trademark office's website was not available, and which meant that I couldn't do my job, other trademark attorneys, and the trademark examiners also couldn't. And trademark Twitter just blew up. And it was a big outage. It was from the time I got to work in the morning, which was about 8 o'clock, until just after noon.
Oh, that's a
And
while.
yeah,
So you don't have all the big trademark books on your shelf any I mean, I
right,
remember
yeah,
my dad's law office, it was just filled with all the
yes,
books.
yeah, yeah. And you and people, I mean, we were lost. We felt we felt abandoned and sad and horrified, and we were just like, well, maybe we should all go home. And it was like, why would we go home? There's nothing to do there. We want our
We put them
document
in the database.
retrieval service.
So this dependence on technology thing, we're laughing about it,
It
but
is.
for businesses, if we don't pay attention to what we're not developing and not learning
Yeah,
as we become more dependent on AI, you're going to have to be able to implement a business practice that accommodates both
yeah.
what AI can do for your business and also how your human potential continues to grow. This is a critical aspect of implementing AI well.
Yeah, and have an emergency backup plan, right? I mean, what do we do if the CEO goes down in a plane crash, right? Well, what do we do if these capabilities that we've built in go down in a crash, right? It's the
Yeah,
same thing.
it
Yeah.
becomes part of our disaster response planning.
Mhm.
And then there's the potential for AI to be used for harmful purposes. This is the
Mhm.
weaponizing of AI. That's one of the big ethical concerns. And some of that potential exists already, and some of it's still theoretical, but that's one of the ethical issues. But then we get to data ownership and control. And
Yeah.
that's where I'd like to kind of segue into talking about some of these implications for businesses as we use generative AI. So the ethical issue is what Michelle just talked about before. We don't know where all the data is coming from.
Right. We don't know where all the data is. So, this issue has come up already, and there's already a lawsuit pending. And it was an instance where, okay, so the artist, and she does cartoons and graphic novels and things like that. And, you can say, please generate a comic in the style of this person, and then that they would generate that comic, and it would look just like it. And you have no property right, you have no exclusive right to your own style. And so if the AI is being trained on images of, that include images that of things that you created, um, is that okay? And that's the thing we don't have an answer to. Now, if we go back to the purpose of copyright, which is to encourage people to create, then how am I encouraged to create if somebody can just take it that way? But, we also run up against this thing. Well, what does it mean in that person's style? So we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And the analogies that I use, and this is in the white paper, but it's what we need to know is what analogy is the court going to make? Okay, so if they make this analogy. We always like plug in human beings and let's see what happens. So if I hire an artist and I say, please paint my portrait in the style of Andy Warhol, and then that artist proceeds to go to various museums and sits there and ponders Andy Warhol's paintings, and then lets that settle into him, and then he goes home and he paints my portrait in the style of Andy Warhol. I think that's okay ethically, and it's definitely okay legally. Okay, but now what if instead of doing that, he says he pulls together a bunch of Andy Warhol painting images, and then he kind of cuts them up into little pieces and uses that to produce a portrait of me. And not even necessarily like in a creative kind of collagey way, but just, well, I need a nose. I need a tip of a nose. So I'm going to use this tip of the nose and from an Andy Warhol painting. And then I need, this part, and I'm going to use that. So not like in a creative way, but just in a very mechanical way.
Stealing the hand. Like nobody can paint hands, right?
Right,
I'm
right.
gonna take a painter's hand and plop it in this painting because then it will look like a real hand.
Right, exactly. Right. So that's not okay. That's not okay legally, and I don't believe it's okay ethically. But we don't know which analogy the court is going to draw there. We don't know, and part of it is because we we're not really sure what the AI is doing. It's
So
black
back to the
boxy.
so back to the transparency and explainability. It's hard
Right.
to know. So
Yeah.
how will the courts? What's the process of the courts even deciding what analogy they will use?
Well, assuming it makes its way to trial, they will bring in subject matter experts. People will talk about what's going on. They will have acts. They will be able to actually through discovery um, understand more about how the particular engines that they're suing, the companies that they're suing, and the particular engines, how they work and what data sets they have. They will be able to find all that out through the discovery process. And there will be lots and lots of discussions about how it actually works and which one of those analogies is more like what's actually happening out there. There will also be public policy issues involved in that. We want to encourage artists to create, but we also don't want to discourage moving forward with additional technologies that are going to make our lives better. So, which way are we going to go? And honestly, I don't even have a guess. I really don't even. I think I have a guess, and then I go to sleep and I wake up in the morning and I have a different guess. Um, if you put a gun to my head and you said, I insist that you tell me what you think, I think where I would come down is that the courts and or Congress are going to make some kinds of decisions, and they're going to be very Solomonic. Solomonic. Okay, they're going to
Cut the baby in
they're
half.
going to cut the baby in half, which is not going to make anybody happy. And we're going to run along a path which is a lot like what happened to the music industry, right? Right, where we figure out a way to compensate the artists or the people who are having input to this database, whatever it is, this data set, and we figure out a way so that they can be compensated for their efforts, even when it's being used in that way, in the same way that they would be compensated if you're a graphic designer and you create something for a client, or if you know, you'll get some type of compensation, and
So
it will become a contractual thing rather than a courts and legislature thing.
so basically licensing, but on a very diminished royalty basis.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But, again, kind of like what the music industry saw is it kind of opened some new markets. Now, obviously, I'm not a musician, and I'm sure that people who are musicians have very strong feelings on this, but it's like the music industry sort of needed to move forward. They needed to start providing music in a way that people wanted to listen to music. And people wanted to buy music song by song instead of album by album. And they wanted to have it digitized because that's how life was going. And
it also broke the stranglehold of the labels on a lot of people. People
Yeah,
weren't able to get
right,
out there and distribute their own music.
exactly, right, because you
So,
could,
I mean,
right,
there were pros and cons.
there's pros and cons, exactly, and that's kind of, but instead of splitting the baby, like we'll each take care of the baby one day a week, right, or something. You got 1 week and I get a week, right? So nobody will be perfectly happy, but nobody will be horribly sad either. Uh, it's I
I'm
think that's what's going to happen. I don't think what the courts and the legislature and Congress ends up doing. I don't think that's going to be the answer. I think the answer is going to be something where the two sides come together and come up with a
I think
workable
industry
decision.
will come up with it. I mean, I'm
Right.
picturing the debacle of the Congress talking to the TikTok CEO the other day. Please don't make me sit through even a minute of them trying to wrap their minds
Yeah.
around AI. So they can't figure out privacy. So, all right. So that's one thing, is trying to figure out which analogy will be used to determine what's owned.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. In the meantime, I have a um, theoretically, as an example. So I'm a company. I have a graphics design department that does a lot of marketing, and they're using some generative AI tools right now. Adobe has it. Like, everybody's introduced some generative AI into their graphics design software. Um, you have another analogy where in the book you talk about, when graphics design software is doing this versus that.
Right.
Share that with the group.
Sure. So, and this is really critical to this issue, but it's also really critical to the other issue that we're going to talk about, which is who owns it. So, um, and I'll actually give you a quote here, and this is from the Copyright Office, and they talk about when artists are using editing or other assistive tools, they select what visual material to modify, choose which tools to use, and what to change or make. Right? That's fine. That's what you're doing, right? So if you're using Photoshop and you are driving the process and it's like, I drew a line, please make this line straight for me. Or,
Please make it straight.
right, exactly. Please draw me a perfect circle, because I'm not good at that. Freehand or using obviously using my touchpad, it's not going to work for me, right? So if that's how you're using it, that's fine. Totally 100% fine. Right. It's when you, and I'll read the second part of this. Right. You need to be taking specific steps to control the final image such that it amounts to the artist's own original mental conception. Right. You aren't just sitting back and saying, draw me a blah, blah, blah. And I don't care how many times you iterate that or how much input you have. That's not the thing, right?
Right.
You need to be creating. You still need to be creating and using the tools to help you create, as opposed to having the tool create and then tweaking it.
So let's go into this example for a minute, because I think this is really interesting. So, by the way, there's a whole new job out there that people in computer
Right.
sciences are being encouraged to go into, but you need a background in language. The killing off all the humanities programs could become a problem, because the job is teaching AI how to think, and it's coming up with very specific prompts. So you're giving the AI machine context and direction. So even if you sat there and said to your AI generative artwork, I want you to do something in oh no, the context first. You are a professional painter that has been making a very nice living selling art in very high end art galleries. Okay, you give it context, because it's going to think about the problem based on its context. And you have a style that looks very much like Jackson Pollock. And you have an approach to art that uses geometries in very unique ways. And you're going to use these colors. Is that your creativity, Michelle?
It is not.
No matter how good you are at prompting. And why do you say that?
Well, I say it because that's what the Copyright Office has said. They talked about the Kashnatova, she's the one she did a graphic novel. So she created a graphic novel. She wrote the words and she organized the images on the page, but she used, I think, Midjourney, I think.
She was using Midjourney.
Yeah, she used Midjourney to create the images. And the Copyright Office initially gave her copyright to everything in the book, and then saw on social media that she basically was telling everybody that she'd used Midjourney, and they basically took away her registration and then gave it back, then just covering the words and the arrangement of the pictures on the page. And the Copyright Office obviously wrote a letter and said, this is what we're doing and this is why. And her lawyer wrote back and said, but let me tell you the process. It took a year, right, of saying, I want an image that looks like this, like just what you just said. And then it would come back with 3 or 4 choices. I think it's 4 choices is the standard that Midjourney uses. And then she would say, no, like, use the third one there, but make it more cinematic, or make it more. And I mean, it was this long, involved process of iteration after iteration after iteration until the AI created the thing that in her mind she saw. And the Copyright Office said, yeah, we don't care. We don't care how much effort it took. It's not the quantity of the effort, it's the quality of the effort. And what we're looking for in terms of quality, and I don't mean quality like a good drawing versus a bad drawing, I mean quality of, what are you doing? Are you creating? And they used an analogy, because lawyers love analogies, and they said, if instead of using AI, Ms. Kashnatova had hired a graphic artist and said, this is the style I'm looking for. This is what I need in this particular panel. This is the expression I want on this person's face. And the artist went away and did some sketches and came back and said, what do you think? And she said, no, 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 more cinematic, more blue, whatever it is. And then the artist went away and came back and went away and came back and went away and came back. Who owns that? Who owns the copyright to that? The artist. Right? So if that, we already have that situation. We do that all the time. We do iterations. Artists do iterations of their creations when they're working under commission, and the artist owns it, unless there's a written contract that says that the person that they're delivering it to owns the copyright. But barring that, and last I checked, Midjourney AI is not capable of entering into a contract like that. So no, that's not it. The person expressing what they want is not the author.
So what happens if, well, let me pose a question differently. I have one of my employees also creates video games. And so she's engaged with a group that are using generative AI on a proprietary AI generative art database where all the authors have given permission to use it in whatever they want to make. Okay, so it's very transparent, very explainable. There's no ethical issues, and they're all using this database together. If Annika creates a video game using those images, can she copyright it?
No.
Why not?
Because
permission.
It's not a question of permission. It's not a question of permission. Okay, so there's also a series. There's 2 cases that I know of, maybe there's more, where the author was a spiritual being. A spiritual being.
Okay.
And so it does, and the spiritual being gave them permission to copyright. It doesn't matter. You still didn't create it. Right? So in the context of creating the game, there'll be aspects of that game that will be copyrightable, right? The words, the story, I mean, there's all kinds of aspects of that will be. But if they're using the AI to create the imagery, then no, it's not going to be copyrightable. It will be in the public domain as soon as it's created.
And so then what does that do to a business's assets if they're, if you're in the business of creating these well, if you're selling video games, that's problematic, right? If you
That's
have a
really right.
department.
So right. So the key thing, I mean, as a lawyer, my advice would be, um, don't use generative AI for anything that is core to your business, right? So if I told you tomorrow afternoon, stop, you can't use that anymore, or somebody, all your competitors are going to start using this thing that you created, you wouldn't care, right? So blogs. For some people, blogs are super duper important. It's everything. It conveys their professionalism. It establishes them as an expert in their field. It's really important, and it's critical that they own that because it's so important to their business. Then don't use generative AI to create your blog. If your blog is just a thing and you put it out there and you like having it, but
SEO
if
fodder.
right, but if your competitor took all of your blog entries and called it theirs and stuck it on their website, eh, no big deal.
But that could happen, right? If you're
Oh,
using
wait, yeah,
entirely generative AI to
right,
produce your blogs, somebody else can take your blog and publish it and you can't go after them.
yeah,
They
yeah,
can just stick their name on it, right?
yeah. And it was fascinating to me when, to me, of course, it's not gonna be fascinating to anybody else. So you can all just go get a glass of soda or something now. Um, so when I do my blog, because I'm an IP attorney, I am unbelievably careful about using other people's imagery in the context of my blog. And I spend a lot of time wandering around New York City finding pictures that I can take, right? So I can use them myself. And um, I'm sitting there and I'm creating a blog talking about Kashnatova and everything that she's doing and the cases that came before that, like the monkey selfie case and others. And I could just use the images. I could use the monkey selfie picture. And it was so weird. It was like I was shaking. I was like, okay, I know I can use this because the monkey selfie picture, nobody owns the copyright. So I can just stick it right there in my blog and I don't have to credit anybody. I don't have to do anything. And it was the weirdest feeling, just
Yep.
knowing that this stuff was there and I could just use it.
Just use
And
it.
right. And nobody could stop me. It was very strange. So,
Fair though. So, okay, so say somebody decides, well, our blog, there's no real thought leadership in it. We are literally just writing a bunch of blogs so that the SEO search terms we want to be found for are in our site to add new content. I'm just going to publish a bunch of, generated content because it's fast. Is there any chance they could get in trouble because of what was put in the blog by the AI?
I think that's a really low probability risk.
Okay.
I think with imagery, that's a thing where we're not really sure. But I don't think that generative written passages are likely to include whole chunks taken out of somebody else's work. I mean, again, it's not like I programmed the AI, but everything that I've read about the way that it's being generated, you know, that it is an independent thing that's happening. They are figuring out a new way, right? Copyright doesn't cover the ideas that's in something, right? Somebody could watch this program and then write down what we're saying it using different words and they could
Do their
publish
own
it,
webinar. Yep.
right? And I think that's what AI is doing. So I think that's such a low probability risk
Would
that
it be more likely in something like poetry, where if it grabbed an entire stanza of poetry?
I don't even think that's a likely thing that they would grab an entire stanza of
No.
poetry. Yeah, I just don't think that's what's going to happen. If that happens, somebody's going to sue the people who created that particular AI program. I mean, I just don't see that. It could happen. This is not legal advice, but I wouldn't really worry about that. I really
Okay.
wouldn't. That wouldn't be something that I'd be afraid of.
So now what if you're one step removed? Now you're a marketing agency. We have a lot of marketing agencies joining us today. And you've got a client and they're like, I don't care what you write. I just need the SEO in there. I need 2 blogs a week. Do whatever you want um, in terms of the content. And as an agency, you deliver entirely generative AI to your client. What are the risks?
Well, the risk there is that your contract with that company says there's a warranty and a representation that what you are delivering them um, is copyrightable, and that you are transferring the copyright when you deliver that post for them, that blog post to them, that you are transferring the copyright to that post to them as well. And if you never had if you didn't have copyright to it, you can't very well transfer it. So if you're handing it off to somebody
With
um,
the expectation.
with that expectation, then yeah, then no. And I if the way I sort of see that happening, if I were an agency like that, is that I would charge different prices. It's like we can give you we can use generative AI to create the blog post, and we'll charge you this much per post. Or alternatively, we can write these in house and not use generative AI. And then the people to whom they're delivering it can make a decision. How important is it to me to actually own the copyright to this? Yeah,
And that's an ethical and legal way to then approach
right.
it.
The transparency there is what's the most critical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do talk about that in the ebook about ways to make sure you're baking really good transparency into all your transactions,
Yep.
with your clients, with your employees, with your customers. That transparency is an important part of properly implementing AI.
Yep.
So that's an interesting solution.
Yeah.
So what haven't we covered? We've covered sampling
Yep.
and the fact that we don't have answers there. What are some other ways that people should be disclosing their use of AI, and where does it matter and where doesn't it?
I don't know. I mean, in a general way, other than the ways that we've talked about, I don't really have
Nothing really in
much else.
particular.
Yeah, there's this really cool exhibit right now at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art here in New York City, and an artist I mean, obviously with permission, um, took images of all of the works that MoMA owns. And again, ownership of the painting is not ownership of the copyright, that were not under copyright, right? So that were old enough that the artist had been dead long enough that they're now in the public domain. And then he himself created a program that used those images to create this astonishing display. It's like 12 feet tall, and it's huge. It's mind-boggling. It's beautiful, of kind of a history of modern art, right? But it's just it's not academic. It's just this beautiful shifting of
Visual.
shapes and imagery and stuff. And right, what he owns there is the program that he wrote, right? To to figure out a way to write a program that could create something that's that engaging and beautiful. So there's also other ways to think of yourself as an artist, right? I mean, sometimes the artistry, and again, not necessarily that it'll be copyrightable, but the artistry, the creativity comes in the code.
Right. As opposed to in the final output.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And he's been very transparent about how he created it.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously, I mean,
It's MoMA.
he had access to excellent high quality images of all
Right.
of this art.
Right.
Yeah, that helped too.
Another thing from the business implementation process is both transparency and training for employees.
Yes. Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah. So you need to tell them, if you're going to you can only use generative AI under these circumstances. Draw a bright line, and you can't use it under these circumstances. And then if you're in the gray, go talk to your manager.
Yep.
Yeah,
And that means they need to understand the ethical concerns around
right,
the use of AI and the
yeah,
legal concerns. I mean,
right,
there needs to be a much higher level of dialogue among employees so that we get to good alignment within companies about how AI can be used
yeah,
from company to company.
yeah.
Okay, so you're a business owner, private business owner, not a public business. You are building a business that eventually you can sell. And there's this concept of goodwill, and it figures into the selling price of your business. Let's talk about that risk.
Yeah, so, even if you don't care that you own the copyright, a buyer could care, right? So if I'm buying a business, um, let's the same example, right, where we're using generative AI to create blog posts because all that we care about is SEO and all this other stuff. Maybe the buyer of your business is actually going to care about owning those and making sure that competitors can't use it. So you have to think about that, and remember also in the contract that you have, there's the single biggest part of contract for mergers and acquisitions is it's almost always Section 3, and it's representations and warranties.
Mhm.
And those representations and warranties especially have a huge chunk about intellectual property, and it will say something like. Um, Company X owns the copyright to all the materials that it uses in the context of its business, blah, 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 blah. Well, except as disclosed on Schedule 3.12, Company X owns all the blah, 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 blah. And you're going to have to list out there that we don't own the copyright to any of our blog posts, or we don't own the copyright to some other thing. And, a buyer could look at that and go, suddenly your business isn't worth so much to me. Yeah. So, don't just think about what you think is important, but think about what a buyer also might think is important.
Even if you don't really plan to sell your business someday, you should always still be building a business you could sell.
You could
So
sell.
you
Yeah.
have to think about the goodwill value. And that
Yeah.
goes back to making sure you make smart choices in how you implement AI
Exactly.
in your business.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that you don't have employees going rogue on you doing things that you later find out
That was,
damage
yeah.
the sale value of your business while you were
Yeah,
in production.
exactly. And a blog is an excellent example, right? Because 10 years ago, nobody thought blogs were going to be important. Right?
Yep.
So who knows what's going to come along next, where people are going to immediately start using generative AI to create it. And then all of a sudden, 10 years from now, we're going to say, this is a really important part of the goodwill of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. So our ability to stop and try to imagine how things might affect our business
Yeah.
is more and more important, and we have to do it faster and
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question for you. It's from
Good.
Charlie Go.
Okay.
Charlie is, by the way, Charlie writes a great newsletter on Substack about AI
All right.
called
Okay.
Artificial Ignorance. I love it. Go subscribe to him. And his question is, what applications of generative AI are you seeing in the legal field itself? I've seen Harvey AI, which is being used by at least one firm.
I don't know. I have no idea. I used to be with a firm, and then my children graduated college, and I stopped hemorrhaging tuition, and I left, and I'm doing my own thing. So I
So your
don't know
generative AI budget isn't to where the big firm
yeah,
is, right?
yeah. So I don't really know. I know the ones that are coming up in the lawsuits, but I don't know what law firms themselves are using.
Well, and there's a lot of conversation in the legal field about will generative AI. I mean, I saw this with my stepmom. She's a court reporter, and technology has almost completely replaced them.
Yep.
And now they're saying it's going to happen to paralegals as well.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, so we have to learn more about that. Jillian Arth is a designer artist,
Okay.
and she wants to know, what if you use AI to start a blog and then tweak or edit it before publishing? Jillian's also in music, so she's probably really interested.
Yeah, that's just it. The tweaking and editing thing isn't going to get you there, right? And obviously there's this gray space in there. If you use AI to start it, and then you tweak it, right? Think about like a human editor, right? I write a book, and a human editor goes in there, and they tell me, oh, you forgot to you forgot to do this disposition in chapter 1, and now chapter 3 doesn't make any sense. I suggest you stick it in here, and let's change this sentence. That editor doesn't have any authorship, right? That editor isn't going to appear on the copyright. So it's the same kind of a thing. If you start, but it's that initial thing. I mean, that's at least what we're seeing now. That's the decisions people are coming up. If you start the blog and tweak it, no, you have to start the blog. And then you can use AI to tweak it, right? It can fix your grammar, and it can fix your spelling, and it can make suggestions for you to say that, there are programs that try to remove bias and stuff like that. So you start it, let the AI tweak it. If you do it the other way around, you're not going to have ownership.
So I have a question for you based on that answer then,
Mhm.
because we've played with AI a ton around here recently, especially as we wrote the book.
Yep.
So I had a thought, wrote the entire thought out in my own words, the way I would normally write it, stuck it in Chat GPT with the instruction. How would you say this better? I like
That's
the way
really interesting.
I like the
No,
way I said it better. We went with mine, but
right.
we were here.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that's in that gray thing. That's right there in that gray thing. Yeah.
Yep. So I'll tell you how I made my decision, and I made my decision based on my core principles. So I went back to ethics for the decision, which was I write business articles and people expect certain things of me. I've been writing business for, again, I'm rounding down 30 years. Therefore, I have a responsibility to write in my voice.
Yeah.
So that was where I went to make the decision. But ChatGPT did some interesting things there where that it was like, that's instructive, but I wouldn't publish that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is that it's going to get better.
Yeah. There's no method right now to even opt out of your data being included
Yeah. Yeah. I
in
mean,
a training
yeah.
database.
But I mean, AI is going to get better at speaking in your voice.
Exactly. And it will have access to your voice because there's no way
Exactly.
to opt out.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's really weird because I'm obsessed about, I mean, my blog posts are very much in my voice,
Mhm.
and very colloquial, no legalese and stuff. And um, I can't imagine having somebody else write them. But I'm sure if I have over 200 blog posts at this point. If I stuck them in and used that as the data set, it could probably generate another one that sounded just like me. And
Right.
that creeps me out. I know. I'm a baby boomer, so I get to get creeped out by that.
I don't know. I think that whenever we do any act of creating, there's identity engaged in that. I
Yeah,
think that's why there's so many emotions around this issue as well, is that we put our identity into our
yeah,
creativity.
yeah,
And AI's, it's just not emotional. We're just not to that AI yet.
yeah. We're
That's
not.
still too theoretical. So it's like, oh, say it better this way then. Yep. Do we have any other? We have a packed audience out there, but not a lot of chatter. Any other
Okay.
questions for our IP expert while we have her here? And while you're thinking, I'm going to put the link back out there again to sign up, because if you're one of our live stream audience members and you want the book that we wrote on this, it's going to be free to everyone who registers. I just need you to go respond to this link. Here, I think I got it right. Well, I'm not seeing any typing or anything else popping in, so I think we've
I just
exhausted.
explained everything so well.
Did. You're really good at this. Did we miss anything we intended to talk about? Oh, Jillian saying it
Oh,
reminds me of the Mint Mobile ad where I saw where
yeah.
Ryan Reynolds had AI write the ad in his voice.
But
Yeah.
there's a substantial database of I mean, the way that Ryan Reynolds presents himself and speaks. So, yeah,
Yep.
that's creepy. But
Yep.
does it have his abs?
No, and nobody can say standing there wifeless like Ryan Reynolds. I'm sorry. Do we miss anything?
No.
All right. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for
Total
doing this
blast.
with me. This was so fun. And
It,
we've had so much fun talking about it the last couple of weeks. And I think it's obvious to our audience, Michelle and I are enthusiastic about AI. Um, it's just important to temper that enthusiasm with critical thought
yep,
and intelligent approaches to solving problems that don't create new problems down the line. And that's
exactly.
where we want people to land with it.
Yep.
Any closing thoughts from you, Michelle?
No, just go out there and have some fun.
Go out there and have some fun with the software responsibly and ethically and legally. All right. Well, thanks everyone for
Yep.
joining us today. This has been great.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll send the replay out to everyone in the next day or so, and we'll send out the books tomorrow. So thanks,
Thanks.
Michelle.
Bye
See you
bye.
later. Bye.